many VCs act really nice to you, but like kind of the second you leave the room are kind of like, grr. Like I have to say, I was at the lobby a couple weeks ago, and you're not supposed to say what happens in the lobby, so I can't divulge details or all that. But there was like a whole user-generated conversation basically about AngelList, and like, there's a lot of angst.
Well, I wasn't invited to the lobby. And I figured you'd give me at least 2 softballs before we launch right into it. No. It's funny. Generally, I would say most VCs who are on AngelList, and almost every VC firm has a partner who is tech savvy or an associate or two who are on
I would hope every VC firm would have a tech savvy partner.
You'd be surprised. There are definitely VCs who are not comfortable using LinkedIn or Twitter and so on. And for that crowd, this is not.
There are people on Facebook's board who don't really use Facebook.
Yeah, I'm not going to name them. But generally, if they're a tech savvy VC firm, they'll have 1 or 2 people on AngelList. We'll usually have a very good relationship with those people. In fact, we have sort of like there are embedded journalists who go to war. We have embedded associates from a bunch of VC firms who drop by every Tuesday morning and help us go through the queue and look at all the deals in the pipeline and so on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and we welcome more of them. So it's kind of an open book. We're not trying to hold anything back for ourselves. And my dream is someday I'll delete my admin account on AngelList and it'll just work. But we're a long ways from that. So generally with most VCs, it's a very positive relationship. I think there's definitely ones who used to be king of the hill in their little niche or their little town or their little venue. And by commoditizing and opening up the deal flow and the visibility and making it more transparent, they've lost some of their information advantage. But Michael Lewis says the internet hates middlemen who rely on proprietary access to information to make a living. And so to the extent that they were relying on information advantage, that's gone away. But what I find is the top tier VCs actually like us the best, which I was surprised about as much as anyone. But if you talk to the Greylocks and Sequoias of the world, their viewpoint is, well, you're creating more and more deal flow for us. And we're sort of a bottleneck at our part of the chain. There's not that many top tier Series A, Series B funds. And so they get to see even more things. And it helps them more efficiently look at more things. So they're pretty happy about it.
Well, we're going to get more into this in a minute because I think the whole topic of deal flow and how it's changing in the Valley is just fascinating. And, you guys are a part of that. But I want to talk about your journey and how you got here, because I know, we all know the story of like Mark Andreessen met with Mark Zuckerberg, and Zuck was like, tell me what was Netscape? I mean, kids who come to the Valley are notorious for sort of not having a lot of institutional memory. And AngelList is such an important thing for entrepreneurs arriving here now, but I doubt they know much of your story at all.
Yeah, it's not terribly interesting. I mean, where do you want me to start? I was born.
Were you born?
Something like.
Yes, your mother looked like this
Right.
at one point. How did you wind up in Silicon Valley? And were you interested in tech? Were you interested in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I fell in love with computers very early on. Actually, Macintoshes, far before it was fashionable. I think like most people in the audience who are engineers or hackers, I started out trying to crack games. But this is back in the day when you were opening up the back of a magazine and typing in a basic program for most of your games. And then in some cases you'd have a cassette tape or an old floppy disk. And you basically have to break into the game and pirate it. You can copy it from your friend. And so it was the hacker mentality that got me into computers. And then when I was in college, I was doing I actually started out doing English and history, and then I
Those are dead ends.
I don't want to drive a cab. Or these days
run a blog.
Or these days it would be an Uber, and an Uber driver probably makes more than most people in this audience right now.
Than me, definitely.
But then I started studying computer science and physics and econ, sort of going more hardcore. And I read this great book called The Macintosh Way, which was written by Guy Kawasaki, and it was about the secret project inside Apple Computer that led to the birth of the Macintosh. And it was just such an inspirational book. So in my mind, Cupertino was this place with like flying castles and unicorns, and it was pretty disappointing when I saw the real Cupertino. It was just all strip malls.
So I felt the same. I moved here in '99, which it was even more, and
very frothy and crazy,
and I flew into San Jose, which they were like, this is the capital of Silicon Valley, and I really was expecting the Jetsons.
Yeah.
And and then they pulled up, and like there wasn't even like a ramp, like a jetway to the airport. Like you had to walk off the steps, and I was like, are we in the right San Jose?
So I literally showed up in Silicon Valley in '96. Wanted to work here. I'd actually gone out of school at the time. Coming out, there weren't many exits, especially in 1995. So I went to Dartmouth, did CS and econ, Couldn't hack it in physics, too hard. And then got out of Dartmouth, and there were only a few exits. There was investment banking, there was grad school, there was consulting. There was no tech recruiting going at the time. So I joined Boston Consulting Group. Quit almost immediately. I think it was during associate training that in the first 2 weeks that I made up my mind to leave.
What happened?
I really wanted to be in the tech industry, and I thought what they were going to do was technology. But at the time, they were consulting for people like 9X, which was a predecessor to phone companies, and AT&T's hardware division, which became Lucent Technologies. And so it really wasn't high tech. And I remember having to hijack the fax line to get a dial-up connection to the internet. And it was just frustrating. So I decided I had to come out to Silicon Valley. So I actually ended up consulting back to BCG as their internet guy. Got a job out here with At Home Network, which became Excite at Home. Came out and just got into it. And the Silicon Valley scene was amazing. Never looked back.
Right.
Surrounded by great people, great tech. Did a bunch of companies and efforts along the way, some successful, some failed. One of the things I don't like about this whole culture here is what makes Silicon Valley great is it's a meritocracy. And I almost feel like a schmuck sitting up here talking to you because I think you guys have just as many interesting things to say back to me. And I've failed more than I've succeeded. And everyone's journey is unique and interesting, and it is a meritocracy. And there's a lot of luck involved too. And some people win and they get to sit up on the stage and talk about how their photo uploading app got sold for $1 billion and yours went out of business. Right?
We had that guy.
Yeah, and he did an amazing job and he did incredibly hard things, and not to take away anything from him, but there were a dozen guys who came before him who did incredibly hard things in the same space, whose timing was just pre-iPhone. And there are a dozen people who come later and do innovations because they're post-Instagram, they don't get that same outcome. So timing matters an enormous amount, who you work with. If you were at PayPal in the early days and ended up in the PayPal mafia, you did incredibly well. So there's a lot of luck involved in the whole system.
How do you feel about that whole where luck ends and begins and where sort of skill ends and begins? I mean, I think this is something people have a lot of angst over in the Valley, and I think they have angst if they've failed, but they have more angst if they've succeeded.
Success doesn't bring that much angst. That sounds like something successful people say to make it sound like their lives are hard. Yeah, there's a lot of angst.
Come on, I mean, to be fair, people who've sold their company for a lot of money, and then they go into this pit of depression. And look, you cannot feel sorry for them all you want, but it's a very real thing.
They need to be slapped upside the head. I mean, that's just idiotic. There is no question that you are better off than you were before you sold the company for $1 zillion. You are in a Pareto optimal situation, and if you don't believe that, then give your money away. Trade it off to somebody else. I think that's just common.
Moskowitz is.
Yeah, I reject those things, those viewpoints that fly in the face of common sense. We are here to succeed, and if you succeed, you've won, and it's great, and you should enjoy it. And if it makes you more miserable, then there's something deeply, deeply wrong with you.
So when you say you're here to succeed, what do you mean by that? Is it about money? What is the goal
for you?
Money
for a lot of people ends up being a scorecard.
Yeah.
For example, you can get into one of these kinds of gatherings, and let's say that I was at an event before I was speaking at Berkeley, and there were about 300 people in the room, and a lot of them were mentors and entrepreneurs and investors and some very successful people. And I said, how many of you in this room have started a company? And a lot of hands go up, right? And then how many of you have sold a company? And some of the hands go down. How many of you had, sold it and it was a profitable outcome, you made some money? Some more hands go down. How many of you built a product that was unique and new? So you weren't just doing something, a variation what already existed, but it was genuinely new. More hands go down. And how many of you managed to actually sell that product to customers, to end users, and get them to pay for it? More hands go down. In volume, nobody, right? So the reality is that the history of Silicon Valley is maybe every decade, 20 or 30 new great products get created, and the rest of us ride off their coattails, right? Including me for most of my career. And so we kind of get lucky and we sell our companies to them, or we get unlucky and we don't. Or we invest in them, or we get a job at one of those companies, or we underwrite their IPO, or whatever it is. But the set of actual things that are truly created is very small. And that is the ultimate goal. I think that's why people look up to Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, because they've managed to create something brand new that did not exist before and spread it to the world in volume and get paid for it. It's a very, very, very hard thing.
Is there anyone who you think is doing that now who doesn't get credit for it? If you had to bet who's like a year old or so, or maybe 2 years older, we'll be looking back and saying that about?
It's a tough one. I don't. If I knew, I'd be out there trying to invest in them, I guess. I think there's probably a lot of entrepreneurs doing that. The question is just that get paid in volume part. There's no question there are people building amazing, amazing things. And there's some really good technology and good products being built. But I don't want to single out particular people that I think are doing incredibly well. Like, there's some things that are like life-changing. Like Uber is a life-changing experience. When you try it, you're just like, holy cow, that was so great. Everything should work like that. And in fact, I think every vehicle that has a commercial license plate will be Uberized in some form or another, whether it's your
planes will be?
Commercial license plate. Yeah, planes should certainly be. You should know when your plane's arriving at the gate, actually arriving, as opposed to when the airline tells you it's arriving. You should know when the fire truck or the ambulance is on its way. The fire truck's behind you. It should show up on your GPS. If you're locked out and you call a locksmith, you should know how far away that locksmith is. If you're, the idea that you have to sit at home in an 8-hour window and wait for the cable guy is absurd, right? That's just nonsense. Or where's the UPS person who comes and rings the doorbell while you're in the bathroom? Right? That just shouldn't happen. So in that sense, Uber is one of those technologies because it just shows you what's possible. And I'm a big fan of all the other things around that space that are like that. So one that I would point out is Postmates, but disclaimer, I'm an investor. But that's how I know the company. But they're doing the Get It Now app where they Uberize couriers. So you order from a restaurant or or you want flowers picked up or you're dry cleaning, and you'll see the courier on a map, so you'll know when they're going to pick up the item and come back to you. So I think thanks to the iPhone, there is a lot of that going on. Now there's a computer in everyone's pocket. It's with you all the time. You're constantly using it. In fact, it's just insane how much time I spend on my iPhone. And I'm sure it's probably true for most of you, the Android phone or your iPhone.
Yeah.
And it's just life-changing.
The surprise for me with the iPhone is, because I'm still one of those people who I miss the physical keyboard and I miss the ease of doing emails, and I don't think it is the Jesus phone. But the amazing thing for me is
people like you are going to die.
I have one.
and then
Thanks, Naval.
All the young kids in the audience who just don't care are going to love the touchscreen.
There was a butt coming there. But I have one because I have to function and use new technology. And I'm stunned that, usually on Saturdays I try to, mostly not work, and it's kind of the one day I try to spend time with my kid. And I will be totally informed and actually get quite a bit of work done, but some days not open my laptop for a day or two. And for someone who writes for a living, a device without a keyboard, that's pretty stunning.
Yeah, I think almost all usage is going to go to mobile devices and tablets and the like. There are large swaths of humanity who are growing up connected to the internet, but have never owned a desktop or a laptop computer, never will, and nor do they need to.
So it's interesting what you said about Postmates. A lot of people see that who were here in the 90s and they're like, oh, it's just like Cosmo. And, I know Andreessen and some others have said basically every business idea that came out in the 1990s was totally a viable idea. It was just done too early. Yeah. Are you a believer in that?
There's a lot of truth to that. For example, I did a business called Opinions back in 1999, which did reasonably well and went public as part of shopping.com, but it wasn't the gangbuster blowout that Yelp is. But the reason it couldn't have been Yelp is because at the time, not enough local businesses were online, and there was not enough density of users online that you could get them to review the local businesses. So all the pieces were not in place. It was just a lot harder to do something back then. To give you an idea, with the Opinions, our first round we raised $8 million. It took us 6 months to ship our website. We had to buy our servers. There were no data centers. Those were brand new. So we had to host our servers ourselves in our office. We had to get a T1 connection, which is a very expensive internet connection to host out to the internet. We wrote our own deployment scripts. We had to buy Sun servers. We had to buy Oracle databases, no MySQL. There was no Git, none of that. So everything was just really, really, really hard and took a long time. And then the addressable user base was 1/100th of what it is today. So just because of network effects and critical mass effects, a lot of businesses couldn't work. Even social networking is not a new idea. Before Facebook, of course, was MySpace, and before that there was Friendster. But before that, you go to Korea, and there were dozens of social networks there, including the very famous Psy World. that predated by years and years. But you needed a high enough density of your friends on the internet that when you sent out that almost retarded sounding "I am your friend, are you my friend" email, you know, like what like
playground email.
Yeah, exactly, the playground emails, like "Are you my friend," right? Before you send out that email,
I don't recommend doing that with it. It's a little weird.
So yeah, it's a little creepy. Yeah, in 1999, just not enough of your friends were online that you would get an answer and get critical mass. So timing is very important.
I'm curious your thoughts on Path, because I was talking to someone about this the other day. I feel like I was one of those people who totally like bought what Path was selling when they first came out and thought, you know, yes, I would love a way. I think I was pregnant at the time, and it was like, you know, I don't want to be one of those people who like shoves baby pictures all over Facebook, but like there are people in my life who would want to see every single baby picture, and I loved the idea of a really well-designed social network for friends and families. In practice, Path has in no way been that for me. It is a smaller subset of the people that I interact with on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and it basically has no value. I'm curious, is that an example? I mean, for me, I'm sorry, you know, is that an example of something that where that adoption curve isn't quite there yet?
It's really hard to say. I think that goes back to the earlier point about how much of it is timing and luck. And you may think everything is right at an intellectual level, but the reality is it just doesn't work in the market yet, or it ends up working in a different way than you anticipated. I don't think Twitter turned out to be what people thought it would be.
It certainly didn't turn out to be what Evan and Jack.
No, it was originally a micro-blogging platform, and it actually started out more about friends tweeting each other about what they were up to.
Right.
And then from there, it sort of shifted more towards a celebrity-driven broadcast mechanism, and now I feel like it's, at least for me, it's replaced television and newspapers, or at least the information news dissemination part of television and newspapers, along with some weird friend stuff mixed in. But it's its own unique thing.
Yeah.
I think it's just very hard to tell what these things are going to turn out to be. It's possible Path may turn out to be something completely different. What is Foursquare today, right? It seems to be morphing more towards a Yelp type thing, where you might have originally imagined that it was more about tracking your friends' locations.
Yeah, it is more about like discovering things around where you are versus where are my friends.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, so let's get back to your story. So you brought up Opinions, which was a very controversial company. I mean, okay, I was looking back through the Naval, history of clips on the internet.
Right.
And, there was this massive scandal about you suing your VCs. And I was reading this Wall Street Journal article that said, this is going to change Silicon Valley forever because everyone's been too scared to sue VCs before. And he's utterly changed it. Now everyone's going to go ape shit suing VCs, which didn't exactly happen. But
I am under non-disclosure as part of the finality.
You're not going to tell us anything about your ballsy suing investors.
I'm legally
move.
bound. I mean, it's all in the public record, so you can go look it up.
Are you surprised that people didn't start suing VCs left and right?
It's a very difficult thing to do, and you have to be very certain.
Was there anything?
Let's just say it did lead to the birth of Venture Hacks, which is what led to the birth of AngelList. Because after that, I was determined that I sort of became the go-to guy in understanding how to negotiate a term sheet. Because now I was very cognizant of what goes into a term sheet and why. And back then, every term sheet used to be custom. And they used to give a lot of power to the investors, whereas actually today, especially coming out of an incubator, a lot of these convertible notes and so on give a lot of power to the entrepreneur. But entrepreneurs take that for granted. It didn't used to be the case. So with Venture Hacks, we really blogged the game theory of venture capital and how to negotiate a term sheet. But these days, the term sheets are so standardized and they've gotten either more balanced or more entrepreneur-friendly that it's no longer an issue. But AngelList probably wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that history.
So let's talk about, we don't have to go back to the birth of Opinions, and you won't tell us a lot of the juicy stuff. For people who don't know, you can look it up, but essentially, as I understand it, and feel free to jump in, Opinions was sold to shopping.com, and there was a lawsuit because a lot of three of the early founders said that basically they were tricked out of signing their shares back over to the company, and very powerful investors like Benchmark Capital were sued. Is there still bad blood there? Is that part of people's hackles about AngelList?
I think there are still people that I would not do business with and wouldn't do business with me, but it's a very small set.
So tell us about Venture Hacks. How exactly did that lead to it? Was it
It was
people
just
coming to you?
yeah, people
or?
coming to me and asking for advice on, hey, what is this term in the term sheet? Should I care about it or not? And so much of it was a black art. I mean, keep in mind, a venture investor, a venture firm probably puts out 10 or 20 term sheets a year. They have institutional memory because they're long-term players for decades in the industry. Whereas you're coming in, negotiating your first term sheet, which is the most important one. You don't know anything. You can easily get taken advantage of, especially with a less reputable firm. And you don't have anyone on your side. Even your lawyers, like the usual Silicon Valley lawyers, get a lot more of their business from the VCs than they do from you.
Yeah.
And there's just a standard way of doing things. And you have to know what's negotiable, what's not, what's important, what's not, and where you have leverage and where you don't. So that's why Venture Hacks was born.
What were some of the ways people were taking advantage of back then?
Well, I mean, there are quite a few of them. One is the different kinds of liquidation preference. So liquidation preference is the investors get paid back before you can make any money as a common shareholder. But it was actually not uncommon for term sheets to have multiples or cases where they would get paid back and they would get a piece of the upside. Anti-dilution, so how do you handle down rounds? Board control, who can fire you? What happens in your vesting? All those kinds of things. It was very common. It still happens, unfortunately, where very often an entrepreneur will get pushed out of their own company. The investor will bring in someone who's like a friendly CEO. The next thing you know, the company runs out of cash. The investor has to recap it. It's a down round, and then they end up owning all the equity. Mm-hmm.
Do you see much risk of that happening today? There's a lot of companies that, were all in this billion-dollar club fairly recently, pre-Facebook's IPO. There hasn't yet been a lot of recaps, but a lot of companies are in these interesting positions. I mean, we saw Spotify this week. They had raised it $1 billion, which a lot of people felt was very heady. They've now raised it $3 billion. I mean, they avoided the down round then, but are they going to? A lot of concerns with Square, like a company that still has a lot of execution risk.
It can absolutely still happen, but I think today it's actually more likely it'll almost happen the other direction, where a lot of times founders have inordinate voting control. Or if you look at some of these notes that companies get their investors to sign up to when they come out of incubators, some of these notes are pretty entrepreneur friendly, surprisingly so. So now it's just business, it's contract negotiations. Mm-hmm. And I think you could see either side causing trouble, but generally, terms are much, much, much more standardized. This is one of the things that allowed us to launch AngelList Docs, where we do the free Series Seed and convertible note closings online. Actually, Ben Mathis, who built it, is sitting right there. Say hi to him.
Hi, Ben.
So basically, term sheets are supposed to be this black art. They're supposed to be incredibly complicated. No one on earth can figure them out. You need expensive lawyers to spend $20,000 per law firm, and they have to spend a month negotiating this document, this closing. But thousands of companies have done it, and hundreds do it every month. So how can it be something that has not been standardized by now? The good news is it is starting to get very standardized. So we took the Series C docs that Ted Wang had put together, and that are used for a large chunk of financings today. And for example, I think Andreessen Horowitz has signed off on them and is willing to use them. And we basically just built a workflow around those. Check boxes, electronic signatures, Dropbox, and fill out the form fields, and then we generate the legalese, put out the PDFs, file it with Delaware and all that stuff. There's no rocket science or magic to it. It's just somebody had to tackle it.
Yeah.
So these things are getting more and more standardized.
And you think that's a permanent shift?
It's a permanent shift, and it's a good shift. When you buy shares in a company on the stock market, you don't sweat the details about what the paper is underneath. You don't think about all the ways you can get taken advantage of. You do maybe with the pink sheets or somewhere where there's like strange stuff going on. But generally, you're assured that if you buy Microsoft stock and you own, 0.1% of Microsoft or whatever it is, that it has that economic value associated with it, and you're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and find out that Steve Ballmer's somehow taken your shares away from you. So you shouldn't have that fear in the private markets either. Neither side should. And it should be well-established contracts and norms and balanced contract law.
How much of this was VCs trying to take advantage of entrepreneurs, and how much of this was, look, at some point they're going to have power again in the ecosystem, and we got to push back while we have power now, and this is just the way the game is played?
Yeah, I don't think any VC sits around smoking a cigar saying, I got to go grab power in the ecosystem. I think.
I wish they did.
Yeah. They don't smoke for one thing, right? I think it's just more about we're negotiating a deal. Contracts are negotiated for the worst case, not for the best case. Things could go wrong. If things go wrong, I trust me more than I trust you. So let me just make sure that we do it my way. I think it's that simple. And I think the entrepreneurs will do it back to the VCs if they have the opportunity. So I don't think it's a fairness thing. I think it's at the end of the day, it just boils down to, unfortunately, a power thing. Which is, by the way, what game theory teaches you. Most of it boils down to power. There is no concept of fairness. So you just have to make sure that you don't get taken advantage of in a situation where you have some power, you exercise it to get a fair outcome, or if you don't have power, you're at least aware of it, so you know what the consequences could be.
So what do you think about people who feel like entrepreneurs are pushing it too far now? I mean, even, Paul Graham did a post essentially saying, remember you're building long-term relationships here. Yeah,
I think there are definitely entrepreneurs who do push it too far. I actually think the rise of uncapped notes is one example of that. I've joked internally with people that next up is uncapped notes into the exit, right? You get 15% back, 15% bonus at the exit, and that's it. That's your entire return. Largely, uncapped notes tend to be non-economic for the investors. And similarly, I've seen situations where an investor who's sort of trusting an entrepreneur will sign a document that says, "Hey, you're going to convert at a 6 million pre or whatever into the next round, 6 million cap. But if we sell the company for $1 gazillion, you just get your money back." So there's all these little twists and loopholes you got to watch out for, which is another reason why it's good just to put these things online, standardize them, and then have one set of docs where you can say, "I read this, I agree with this, okay, now I don't have to touch it again, I don't have to think about it again, and the next time the docs show up, I know it's the same docs. And if there's a change, you can call that out, but just make it very standardized."
Right. But what would you recommend of young entrepreneurs who are in the room raising money? Should they, if they have a hot company people want to get into, should they try to push it as far as they possibly can?
No, because money has karma too. And if you treat it badly, it will treat you badly. The wheel kind of always comes around, I feel. So I think you have to be balanced about it, but if you have a strong hand, then you do deserve a strong outcome. The problem is everything is contextual. It's very hard to sit up here and say, always do X, right? By the way, that's what keeps these interviews interesting. If there's one set of right answers, your first guest would answer them all, and this place would be a ghost town. But everything is contextual. And I do think that you want to leave something on the table. Like a good rule of thumb in negotiations is, negotiate hard, get what you're fairly due, and at the end, give something back. Because you have to work together for the long term. I actually now firmly believe that everything you do in life, all the returns in life come from compound interest. It comes from the length and strength of your relationship. Look at the PayPal mafia and how they just keep compounding into new companies that they do together. Similarly, in your marriage or relationship, the longer you hold out, the better it gets, right? The longer you survive. Warren Buffett is the richest guy on the planet, or legally the richest guy on the planet. There's a lot of illegal wealth out there too, because he never spends $1. He just reinvests it. He just keeps compounding it, and he holds it. So the same way, your best business relationships are going to be with the people that you end up working with for decades. And that is true of your investors too. So if you treat them well and always try and make them money, and if you don't make them money, at least they don't feel like you overreached, you will keep that relationship for a long, long time. One of the things that I'm now very wary of is people who are over-optimizing for the moment, because they're signaling they're not a long-term player. If they're not a long-term player, you don't want to establish a relationship with them.
Do you see a lot of that?
A ton. Silicon Valley is now back into the phase it was in 1999, maybe not as frothy, but that it is a magnet town, so it's pulling a lot of people in from the outside. And back to game theory for a second, a lot of virtue comes from the iterated prisoner's dilemma, if you will, which is you're going to be playing that same game with these people over and over and over. So it's in your benefit to cooperate because you know you'll play with them again. But when a new person comes in and the rewards can be huge, you can make 20 million, 50 million and win and leave, the temptation is to cheat. It's to kind of go for the gold right now.
Or some people would call hack.
Or hack, but it's not a good kind of hack. And there's a lot more of those people in the ecosystem right now.
Are they coming in at the entrepreneur level, angel level, all of the above?
Every level. It's just whenever someone comes in as a newcomer, what you have to basically decide is, is this someone that I'm going to know a decade from now? Is this someone I'm going to be doing business with a decade from now? And if not, then you have to be wary of what they're offering.
How can you tell if someone has the wrong motives?
Oh.
How do you know if that's someone you don't want to do business with a decade from now?
Well, a simple one is, do you like them? If you don't like them as humans, you're not going to associate yourself with them a decade from now. Second one is, do you trust them? And you have to pick that up in little ways, because you won't really know until the money hits the table. That's when you see what everyone's actually made of. But you want to try and assess them in little ways. References obviously matter. And you want to see how considered and considerate they are about things. I've definitely, as an investor, I've dropped out of investments because I felt the founder was over-optimizing. And in the grand scheme of things, it was not a big deal. Like, the economics were almost the same. But the fact that they were fighting for this tiny, tiny little piece is telling me that they're overreaching. They're going for too much right now.
How frequently in the Valley do you think people with the wrong interests win?
Probably more than half the time.
And so, does that bother you? Or you just, if you leave that money on the table, fine?
Yeah, you can't let it, because so most of the times that you do good work and you do good things and you do it the right way, you will lose. So most of the time you will do good things and you will lose. And that's just the nature of the beast. It's a very efficient market. There's a lot of luck. There's a lot of competition. And you might, first time you do your company, it'll probably fail. And the second time you do it, you'll probably do it with the wrong people. And the third time you do it, you'll probably get taken advantage of. So you'll go through these learning curves. But you only have to get it right once. That's the good news. The outcome is usually so good in a binary sense when you get it right, that you just have to get it right once. And what's the risk? I mean, these days, people are writing checks, you're still getting paid, you're living in one of the best cities in the world, you're drinking great coffee, you're hanging out at great bars, you're going to great restaurants,
And it's considered glamorous. I mean, we're no longer in a time where if you are at a cocktail party and someone asks what you do for a living, and you say, oh, I don't really work, I'm trying to start a company, like, that's no longer, this guy is a total weirdo.
Yeah, I kind of don't like that, actually. I wish it was more of that underdog mentality.
You and me both, but you're the one enabling all of it.
I don't think so.
You are enabling more people
to get funded?
Entrepreneurs. So is that in and of itself a good thing?
I think that is an unequivocally good thing. What I don't think is necessarily good is for more companies to be funded. I don't want companies that are unfundable to get funded. I think that is a bad outcome for everyone. Because there are a lot of great businesses that can be built without funding, but the moment you add funding, it ruins them. Because now you have these high expectations and they have to do stupid things to generate return for their investors. So you definitely don't want that. But I do think that more startups are a good thing. To me, startups are just small companies and more creativity.
So you lump into that lifestyle businesses?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the lifestyle business thing is it's a little bit of a put down that comes more from the investor side. But the reality is, I think we would all love to have great lifestyle businesses.
Yeah.
Right? It's something we're passionate about, something we work on. We set our own hours. We're in control of our own life.
No one else is
your boss.
Yeah.
And you can keep the profits, and you don't have to stay up nights or throw up in the shower because you're trying to figure out how to turn it into $1 billion business, and you've convinced everyone around you it's going to be $1 billion business, but you yourself are not convinced, right? So, and then don't tell me you haven't had that moment. Maybe not throwing up in the shower.
I was throwing up in the shower a couple months ago. I think it was because I'm pregnant.
I think it's because you're pregnant. Yeah. Fair enough. But I'm sure look, you have investors.
Yeah.
You told a story.
Yep.
How do you feel about the story? Let's see, at $20 a ticket, and I think half of you are free. So Reid Hoffman gets how many pennies back in the dollar? Right?
The ticket prices we absolutely lose money on. This is a long-term bet. No, look, I have so much appreciation for sort of everything every entrepreneur I've ever written about has gone through after doing this for 10 months.
Yeah, it's
and look,
miserable.
Frankly, I'm not one of these people who will ever go around saying, I just love the early days of a company. No. I never want to do this again. Yeah. I hope I am running this company for the rest of my career. I never want to do what I did for the last 10 months
AngelList is my last company, partially because I love it so much. I want to do it forever, and partially because I don't have another one in me. burned.
Well, thank God for you and everyone else who's disrupted the industry.
You know, the thing that actually disrupted the industry was not us. And I give YC, for example, a lot of credit for pioneering the incubator, the new incubator, but it wasn't them either. The thing that disrupted the industry was just the cost of building a business has collapsed. And that has changed everything. And so, like I said before, we had our Sun servers and our Oracle databases, and now you have AWS, and you want to market, you want to acquire customers, you use Google. You want to do customer service, you do that on Twitter. You want to market, you use Facebook. You want to, host, it's on Heroku. You need some part-time labor, it's Elance or Odesk. You need your site cleaned up, that's Mechanical Turk. You want money, it's Kickstarter or AngelList. So they're just, or they're angel investors. So there's just so much embedded leverage in the system now that a single person with a lever can truly move the earth. It was impossible.
Right.
I think the venture community, for example, likes to treat Instagram as an aberration. They like to say, oh yeah, Instagram, well, don't worry about that. The rest of you are still going to need $100 million from us. But I don't think that's true. I think we're going to see a lot more Instagrams. There was actually a specific point of disagreement I had with Mark Andreessen, since you want me to be controversial. Mark's counterpoint to this would be that Instagram didn't monetize. But I think they could have monetized fine with 5 people, 5 additional people. They don't need, and there's nothing about Instagram that needs 200 people. So I think we're going to see more and more and more great businesses built that are essentially built entirely through leverage, that are communicating to the world through APIs, and just have very, very, very little headcount. So they just need very little capital. And because they need so little capital, everything changes. The entire ecosystem changes. The entire nature of the venture industry and the relationship to the entrepreneur changes.
And it also changes the biggest pain point that entrepreneurs have right now, which is talent.
That's right. Talent is the biggest pain point at the moment. It actually makes it a lot harder because people can go start their own company. So if you don't have product market fit, also in Andreessen's words, why should they come work for you? Why shouldn't they just start their own company or go into an incubator? Certainly if they have a good idea and they have the risk profile and they feel like they're ready, that's your opportunity cost. So the days when you could, before product market fit, you'd raise $1 million and you'd hire your first engineer, you give him a quarter point, those days are over. If you don't have product market fit, these people are just late founders, and you have to treat them as such. So it makes it a lot harder to hire. It also means that the entire venture capital community has gone through a massive shift in the last 3 years, which I don't think most of them are aware of. I think many of them are aware that things are changing, but I don't think they understand what a deep level they're changing at. To give you one example, Sand Hill Road became the center of the tech universe because that is the place you used to go to for your first check. It was the first credible money in who took a board seat and had influence over the company. But that position and power moved away from them. In 2007, it started moving toward the so-called super angels, the Chris Sakas and the Dave McClures, and I was doing it for a while. But now, today, that first check privilege goes to the incubators. So, most companies don't go around calling themselves a Sequoia company. Rather, they are, YC-backed Dropbox, or they are Techstars-backed Torbit, right? So they're marketing themselves in a different way. It's AngelPad-backed Mopub. So these companies are taking their brand and their advice and their first check. The first people who believe in them are doing it with $25,000, $15,000, not with $3 million. And so that puts the venture capital industry on a further back section of the feeder chain, which is dangerous because the brands get built by establishing the early relationship with the entrepreneurs. And so I think that's the lower amount of money that companies need changes everything. And that lower amount of money, it's continuing on. I mean, yes, today most of the seed rounds are $750K or they're $1 million, but there are a lot of companies that can get really far in $250K. You have 2 or 3 great hackers, you can prototype and test something for a couple of $100K. I mean, heck, they do it in incubators for $25K in 3 months. That's the competition. So that lowering cost of building a business is dislocating everything and everyone.
So let's talk about the role. I want to talk about the role of the super angels, and I want to talk about the role of VC firms who try to compete with them and get lower and lower down. Because look, I think evidence of what you're saying is how much VC firms have reinvented their model, trying to do this. But let's talk about the super angels first. I think a lot of these, were frankly unsustainable. And a lot of them, while they'll announce they've raised a new fund, if you really talk to the LP community, they've raised it at much lower rates than what they were seeking. And now everyone is very panicked about this Series A crunch that they see coming. And it's interesting, the people I hear freaking out about the Series A crunch are not the entrepreneurs, they're the super angels.
I disagree. I think the super angels have had stupendous returns.
Not all of them. Really? You think in aggregate?
At least the ones that I was investing alongside, the Mike Maples, the Chris Sakas.
Maples is a dramatic exception for many
sure,
of
but
these
even people like
you don't think it's the same ratio
and
that it is in venture capital, where 95% of the returns are coming from 5%
Well,
of the
I'm comparing
deals.
to the class of 2007, 2008, when we were out investing and the average pre-money was between 1 and 3 million. And VCs wouldn't touch it because it was just too early for them and they didn't know how to write a check for 200-300K. The returns from that class are pretty good. Now, if you go into 2010 and you're seeing prices of 6 to 10 million, same quality companies, more competitive, your returns have to go down. So I think the vintage matters a lot. And super angel is a funny term. It's just most super angels had funds. They just had small VC funds. They just took the angel branding.
Right.
But they're really funds. They're really VC funds. So to me, the distinction at the end of the day is not drawn between whether you have other people's money or not. It comes down to are you willing to write a small check? Are you willing to decide quickly? And most importantly, are you willing to forego the normal control terms that a VC would have put on you back in 2007? So you say, okay, I don't need a board seat. I'm in the service business. I'm going to help you, and you tell me how I can help you. The super angels as a class, I think, are almost setting up to be the next generation of the branded Series A firms.
I mean, they're growing into that. Increasingly, these guys, in order to avoid the Series A crunch, are all doing seed extensions, which they didn't do before. And so if you look at the money they're putting to work in a company, it's pretty similar to what Series A used to be.
Yeah, the Series A crunch, you could take 2 points of view on it. One is you could say, oh, there's not enough Series A capital. But the reality is, I think it's a little differently. I think that a lot of these companies are experiments. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. They're cheap, low-cost experiments, and they should be treated as such. So if they fail, there shouldn't be any egg on your face. You just go and start over and try again. Look at all the YC companies that go back into YC. So there's a recycling here. The problem is the prices have to reflect it. They have to reflect a hit rate of 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10 instead of the 1 out of 3. And I think early investors who may have had the wrong expectation that it's not an experiment will try and push you into raising a seed prime, as we call it inside of AngelList, or raising a Series A when it's premature. And all you're doing is you're trapping yourself. You're locking yourself into push, like Sisyphus. You're trying to push this rock uphill, and maybe there's no market there, or you missed the market, or you don't have the right team, and it's just almost impossible. So you have to treat it like it's an experiment. The prices have to reflect that. The amounts raised have to reflect that. The attitudes have to reflect that. In some sense, I feel bad for this generation of entrepreneurs because back in my day, if you managed to raise that first few $1 million, the odds of you making it to the next round were 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3 because there just weren't that many companies that had raised $5 million. But today, if you raise a seed round, the odds of you making it into a Series A are closer to 1 in 10. So the odds are against you. You just have to be more comfortable with the idea of failure. So I think it's better if you're going to fail fast, fail early, acknowledge reality, and then try again.
And in general, I don't think startups do this in the Valley. I mean, you look, a lot of people, there's an obsession with finding someone a soft landing, which means an acqui-hire.
Right.
Why is the repercussion of your company did not have that product market fit? There was something you missed.
Right.
Now I'm going to go be an indentured servant to Facebook for the next couple years with some members of my team so that we can all sort of save 50 cents on the dollar. I mean, that doesn't seem particularly healthy to me.
Yeah, the acqui-hires aren't really pushed by the investors.
I don't think that's true.
The investors lose money in most
not in
acqui-hires.
the seed cases. Listen, I have talked to super angels, as we call them, who say the bulk of their time is spent calling around trying to get these guys soft landings right now.
Yeah, they're really hard.
No,
the set of companies that get soft landings is very small. I think it's overrated in the press because because if your company dies completely, you're not going to talk about it. You're not going to tell anyone about it. But if you get the acqui-hire, then you get to save face and you'll trump it up a bit, and so will the investors, so you'll hear about it. So there's just an evidence bias here, which is
but they've dramatically increased.
I think the demand for people trying to sell them has gone up. Well, supply has dramatically increased, but the actual closed transactions, I don't think has increased all that much. Not most companies do not get soft landings, even the ones who want them. And I don't think it's so bad for the entrepreneurs necessarily, because you go hang out at Google for a year or 2 or 3, and they pay really well. They'll give, and the acquirers are getting very smart about separating the investors from the talent. So they'll give a big chunk in retention and earn out to the talent, and the investors often lose money.
Yeah. So I've heard recently that this is increasingly happening, and that a lot of investors are pioneering, terms to put into the term sheets.
Right.
Of
So they'll say guaranteed
acqui-hire.
2x or whatever, right? But the reality is they can't force it. When it comes time for the actual acquisition, the acquirer will say, well, we're only going to pay 10 cents on the dollar, take it or leave it. And if you leave it, your opportunity cost is 0. So absolutely, we are seeing investors put in multiples on acquisitions so that they don't, so that they make some return in these cases. But the reality is they have no negotiating leverage.
You brought up Y Combinator. I'm curious to talk a little bit more about the impact that's had. One thing that's fascinated me about the last few years is how many things were sort of pioneered. And again, you said the same thing with companies as we just discussed, but at the venture level, how many things were pioneered in the late 90s as new ways to form companies that did not do well, and how many of them have now worked in this iteration? There was, when it comes to crowdfunding, there's this horrible sort of Draper Fisher fund called MeVC that was a huge failure. Right. There were definitely incubators that were huge failures. Right. There were a lot of firms who tried to do sort of what Andreessen Horowitz has been doing with the agency model. There was the Keiretsu model of Kleiner Perkins, which now First Round is doing. I mean, it's funny how much you see these coming back. Right. I'm curious from your point of view, both with you guys and YC, and let's take YC first. Why did it work better this time?
YC worked for a number of reasons. One is, of course, Paul himself has incredible reach and amazing writer and advisor. So he just pulled in talent. He pulled in talent that was completely out of market. At the time, if you were 2 young kids graduating out of MIT and you had done some great projects, you could not just go start a company. It wasn't that easy. So he provided them a path into Silicon Valley. Now, of course, there are multiple paths, but at the time, that was the only such path. And unlike the older models that were tried, like the Idea Labs of the world, he didn't take 30 or 40% of your company. It wasn't his idea. He was taking a much smaller chunk. He was basically saying, I'm going to be your early advisor / angel who will put you in business and really explain to you how things work and give you access. And for that, I'm going to get in a very low valuation, but I'm going to take the most important part of the advice that you look for in an investor. And then you'll be able to make it up by getting a higher valuation from other people later. So he really organized it I'll give him credit for another thing too, which is he modeled it very much after the college model. So the time period that you these were mostly for people coming straight out of college, so it's a very natural transition. And it was like, okay, you're going to have a 3-month, like a semester type period. You're going to have a project that you have to ship and show. There's going to be weekly meetings and reviews. We're not quite grading you, but it's almost at that level. We're going to have office hours, just like you did with your professor. And then finally, there'll be a demo day within the graduation alumni network. So it was a very nice templatized model that just overlaid onto the school model.
YC is a lot like you guys in the fact that it's one of these things that VCs ostensibly say they support, and then there's a lot of grousing about the impact on the ecosystem. Do you think one of the issues that VCs have with YC is how much his economics are just completely different? I mean, he doesn't have to go fundraise every couple years. He doesn't have to he has some LPs, but he doesn't have to deal with them in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, his economics are great if he keeps finding an occasional Dropbox.
But he doesn't need very many of them.
Yeah, that's right. I would guess his economics are probably as good as Mark Andreessen's, but without the $3 billion under management and having to deal with all the LPs. So in that sense, he's really hacked the venture model and created this incredible niche at the beginning. The irony is the rule of thumb in the VC business used to be that the more money you raise and the more money you invest, the more money you will make. And YC turned that on its head and said, with an absolute minimum amount of capital, we will have amazing economics. And it was a startup. They took huge risk, and now they're getting paid for it. They deserve to.
Yeah. Do you think it's sustainable in the same way? A lot of people feel like there's level of arrogance there. There are people saying it's overfished pond.
No, I think it's sustainable as long as the good companies keep going there and they keep doing a good job with them. I do think that the other incubators have a lot to offer as well. So, if YC is a Harvard or the Stanford, there will be MITs and there will be, Caltechs and so on. So they're starting to segregate incubators by geography, of course. Accelerate in Chicago, Mucker Lab in LA, 500 Startups, Global, Techstars, of course, Boston, New York.
But do you think any of these guys are in the same league as YC, either in the halo effect it gives you?
Not yet in terms of the markup/halo effect of getting that higher valuation and demo day. But in terms of sheer quality, I've been very impressed with some of them. AngelPad, which has kind of all the ex-Googlers, smaller class, very high quality. If you look at Lemnos and Accelerator, they're doing the hardware ones. They have very high quality and they're uniquely focused on hardware. Techstars New York usually has some very strong companies, and the others are specialized or up and coming. There's a lot of good ones out there, so I don't think it gets to be just one size fits all forever.
The interesting thing to me about incubators is, to me it's very easy to find capital and to find mentors in Silicon Valley. I mean, particularly compared to probably anywhere else in the world. And yet, Y Combinator is here. I mean, it would be easy to say Y Combinator would do a lot more value in places where that wasn't the case. Do you think incubators work outside of tech hubs that have some sort of critical mass?
It's much, much harder. The problem is that funding markets generally develop backwards. People think like, I'm going to create an incubator, and then when people graduate, well, who's going to fund them? It's got to be the angels. If there's no angel ecosystem, those companies fall flat on their face and die. And so, and then even if you have angels who invest in them, then you do Series A, VC to pick up the next part, and a Series B to pick up the next part, and so on and so forth. So what tends to happen is, first in a country, you have the public market get robust. And then after that, you'll have mezzanine investors come along who will just cherry pick deals right before they go public. And then you'll have the late stage, then the earlier stage, and so on. So YC had to move here from Cambridge because they couldn't have worked anywhere else. There just wasn't enough of an angel ecosystem. Now there is an angel and Series A ecosystem in at least New York and Boston and one or two other places. London and the rest of the US is a little dodgy. But not in a bad way, but just, there's not enough VCs. Like you go to Austin, there's 2 VCs, right? I love Austin, great place, 2 VCs. And one of them spun out of the other, so they all talk, right? They smoke cigars. What's happened is some of the newer incubators are actually performing a very important function, which is they are moving people around. So if you look at StartMate, for example, they're an Australian incubator, and they have top-notch quality, partially because they cream skim the entire country of Australia. And they pick a few of the best companies, and then they'll work with them for a couple of months in Australia, but then they'll move them here to the US and spend the last 2 months here and then take them around for demo day and funding. And like Founder Fuel is doing that out of Montreal and so on. So they are building the bridge, because if you're an entrepreneur in that area, you don't have that bridge to the investors. So you rely on the incubator to help you do that. So actually there's forming sort of a symbiotic relationship with AngelList, because they will train the entrepreneur and help them at the beginning, and then to the last piece, they'll bring them out here for the demo days and they'll put them on AngelList, and we'll help them meet investors as well.
So I want to essentially talk more about AngelList directly. How much, you guys started really with the funding, you've done some stuff on the talent side, you've done stuff with the documents. I mean, you seem to be sort of like ticking down the list of things that irritate entrepreneurs and trying to make it at least more open or easier. How much of that was the original vision of the business, and how much of that is just, well, this worked, let's try this?
Right. Yeah, it's really hard to say. You have a plan, you have a vision, but it just evolves every day. If you care about your business, if you care about your product, you're thinking about it for every minute of every hour of every day. Your spouse is talking to you and you're thinking about your business. And then you look back and you say, that's great, honey. And you smile. And you haven't heard a darn thing she said all over dinner because you've been busy thinking about your business. And if you're not in that mode, then you're probably not in entrepreneur mode. So given that, it's very hard to draw a boundary and say, this is what we meant to do and this is what we end up doing, because it's a smooth continuum. You're always coming up with ideas. And some are better than others. You try them out against the marketplace. So we started with fundraising. We wanted to make introducing startups to investors easier. And then we did some of that. And then we said, okay, we're going to go into Series A. That turned out to be a lot harder than we thought. We've definitely gotten dozens of Series A's done, but nowhere near as many as we would like because it's a higher bar and more of a relationship business. We thought, okay, we'll go into all small business equity capital. That sort of failed. There are just not that many angels outside of the tech industry. We're going to go global. Well, there's only a few towns where it sort of works, so we're big there now, and China is a black box to us, and probably to everyone who's not Chinese. And then we thought, okay, what other verticals can we get involved in? It is modeled very much after Craigslist. That's not an accident that it's called AngelList. And the Craigslist model is help people find the connections for all the services that they need. And charge for very, very few of them, and make it seamless and quick and easy and no hassle. And so we want to try that. And so the next thing we did was talent, which we launched a couple of months back. And it's not widely advertised, but it's actually quite a bit bigger for us than fundraising. We do today about, probably last week, we did 300 introductions between startups and investors. So that's mutual opt-in, where the startup is willing to meet the investor sees the company and hits the get an intro button. In reality, we might have done twice as many because a lot of it routes around AngelList. They see the company on AngelList and they go through LinkedIn because they don't want to be tracked or seen. But we're doing about 3 times that volume right now in talent, where we're connecting a curated group of developers and designers from companies that have failed, or maybe they want to leave their current company, and we're connecting them to 2,000 startups that are fundraising. Sorry, that are recruiting, and we haven't advertised it at all. But the set of startups that is recruiting is actually quite the who's who. We've got Quora and Kickstarter and Path and Khan Academy and Pocket, the Read It Later guys, and Climate Corp, and and Yelp, and all kinds of great companies that are recruiting. That to me is like the undertold, the less told story of what's working at AngelList, which is the talent piece.
Do you charge for that?
We do not charge for that. We've actually been using it ourselves. It's already paid itself back. We hired Misha through it, and he's here somewhere. He's our there he is. He's a designer with AngelList. Welcome, Misha. And we found him through AngelList Talent, and we actually made an offer yesterday to a developer that we found through AngelList Talent. And the quality, I was going through it today, and it was blowing my mind. There were some really good people there, and I actually almost went to the one guy we have working on it, and I almost said, "Hey, Kian, just close it down. I just want to mine it first." It's like a big piñata. Don't let them get to it.
You almost did that, or you
no,
did that?
I did not do that. There's no early look. But yeah, that's probably a place where we will charge over time. We got to pay the bills. And
why not charge now?
At the end of the day, our motto is that we stand for the startups and want to do what's right for the startups. And most startups don't have any money; they're broke. I mean, how many people here are on free or discounted tickets, right? Don't raise your hand. You'll make your neighbor feel bad. So to whoever paid the full $20,
the huge $20.
The $20. The pizza and the beer were thrown in. So subtract that out. So whoever lost $5 on this whole thing. So
there's a T-shirt too.
Right. So,
no one is losing money off this transaction.
So the truth is, a lot of startups can't afford it, and big companies can afford it. Big companies will pay to recruit, and
Quora could afford it though.
Sorry?
Quora could afford
Absolutely.
it. Yelp could afford
That's right.
it.
And your average recruiter charges $25,000 to $30,000 right now for placing a developer or designer. I know because we paid one.
Right.
In fact, ironically, the guy who built AngelList Talent internally was the only guy we ever paid a recruiter for. We paid him $25,000, and then he came in and he created the system that routes around recruiters. Well, part of our
efficient use of $25,000.
Exactly. So part of our policy is we don't allow recruiters on the platform. We want the talent to see everything that an investor would see. So they almost see the company's business plan, and they see who the investors are and how much cash the company raised and who the founders are and where they come from. And we force the company to divulge how much equity and salary, at least a range that they're offering. And we have thrown companies off that refuse to divulge that. They got really mad at us. But we said, hey, if I'm looking for a job, I want to see this, and you should be transparent about it. And so likewise, we also promise the talent that we're going to connect you to a founder or to the CEO or someone very high ranking in the company. You're not going to go through the normal HR screen. So given that, it limits our ability to put the big companies on there. And the big companies are the ones that pay. So it's hard to charge. So we will charge. We'll probably make it in some model where the small companies can pay an equity or convertible note or if it's real hardship, call me, right? And it'll still be way below market. It'll still be far, far cheaper than anything else out there. But right now it's an open season, so go recruit. It's a big piñata.
How are people finding out about it?
It's a good question. I don't even fully know. I think it's word of mouth. Part of it, we did send out one email to our AngelList user base, which gave us a little spike. I think a lot of people come in and they're thinking about creating a company, and they have an aspirational startup, and then they see it. Another one could be that they are researching a particular company and they find the profile on AngelList. But right now we're adding about 250 curated, and this is vetted, so picked out of a bigger pile, startup quality, good people every week. So that's just new people entering the system. It's certainly more than any one company can keep up with. So anyone who says to me that they're having a hard time hiring right now is actually not really looking that hard. I mean, I agree it's hard to hire. It's non-trivial. But it's not hard to meet good candidates. That problem is being solved. What is probably hard is to convince them to join you.
Right. What are the other problems that you think entrepreneurs have that are not solved?
A big one is customers, getting early customers. There's a lot of stuff that you rely on a top-tier venture investor for, like, who's a good attorney? What do I do for my back office? I need a good PR firm. I need, 2 early enterprise customers contacts. I need an acquirer. All of these people are in the AngelList ecosystem. They all use it in various ways. I mean, we have reporters, TechCrunch, you guys, whoever who are monitoring BetaBeat, VentureBeat. We have M&A groups. There's more than 30 M&A groups that actively use AngelList. Square, Yahoo, Google, Groupon. They pay attention to companies on there. They research them. We just don't make it explicit. Those are very implicit transactions, and you're going to see us surfacing more and more of those.
Are you going to charge for that?
Probably not.
I mean, if you're Craigslist, what is your equivalent of the,
Sure,
guy listing apartments?
Right, Craigslist charges for jobs and for real estate. So I think our closest
And that was the key to LinkedIn as well. I mean, they hit profitability off of the jobs thing.
Right, so jobs is an obvious one. Another one might be that there are people who want to reach lots of startups. So today we have almost 100,000 startup profiles, 25,000 actively maintained and claimed. And those Braintree is one of your sponsors, right? They're payment processing. They offer developer kit to make it painless and easy for developers to process payments. And I can say that because I'm not on the payroll. They didn't pay me anything. So I can advertise your sponsor for you. But I think they would like to be able to reach all the startups on AngelList at the point where those startups are just getting funded. So the good news is we have the companies coming in before they're funded, through the funding period, when they get funded. And so at the right time, you can offer them more and more things. But like I said, generally the startups don't have big ability to pay. And we really want to stand for the startups. We want to make life easy for them. So we got to find somebody else in the ecosystem to pay. Another thought is there's a lot of out-of-market capital sitting out there that wants to be in startups. But you go to Wall Street, there are hedge funds, there are mutual funds. Right now, their option is to wait until the company goes public 10 years later. And there are intermediate steps at which they would like to be able to back other good people on the ground and invest in startups. So I think we can charge for access there down the road. That starts getting us into broker-dealer territory, so you also have to be regulatory compliant. It's more complicated. But it's good for the startups because it brings more capital into the system for the startups, gives them more options. So those are other places where we can go.
Are there things that you will never do?
Yeah, we'll never charge the startups and the investors for meeting each other. I think that's just not going to happen. We don't want adverse selection. We want everyone to feel comfortable using it. We don't want anyone to have a reason not to use it. So that is a very simple one that we will never do. I also, like Google has this "don't be evil." We will never do anything to screw over your startup knowingly. If we do, it's an accident. I apologize, but we're not going to do it. So even the docs that are written that we use, they're balanced. They're meant to be acceptable to the investors, but they're about as friendly of a deal as you're going to get from sophisticated investors for the entrepreneurs. So they're very much written with the entrepreneurs in mind. Have
you had debates in-house of ways that you could be monetizing the service? And like some people think, well, this isn't doing something bad. And then other people think there are. I mean, there's got to be some of those gray areas.
Yeah, it's funny. The investors always come up with the same one. They always come to me and they say, "Why don't you charge every investor who's on AngelList?" I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to give them a reason to not be on AngelList. But they say, no one would care. You could charge them, $1,000 a year. Like, well, that's not even worth it. I might as well sell tickets to PandoMonthly. So that's a money loser if I ever heard of one. So we're not going to do that. But for some reason, the investors always come up with that business model. So there's been no debate around that.
What about like the thing that I always hear that entrepreneurs hate is like when they have a liquidity event and then it's like all the wealth managers just come out of the woodwork and like we'll go through, I always call them zombies because it's like they will plow through a barn trying to get to you. They'll just, like this happened with me with TechCrunch and I didn't make any money off of TechCrunch.
Yeah. That's always the best part when they show up thinking you're rich and
and it's
not.
like,
it's like the worst feeling.
The worst of this without the money. I'm still on 2 or 3 email lists about private jets. I have no idea how that happened. What if like wealth managers were like, I want to pay you to access people who, like that would piss people off.
I wouldn't do that. It's like putting your Doberman in someone. It's not nice. No, I don't think we're going to go down that route. I think if we make some money, it'll be basically providing a service that you clearly agree was incredibly useful, probably not related to fundraising, and where you will still charge a below market rate. It's just so much more efficient to do everything in the cloud, frankly. To some extent, if you look at what a top-tier venture fund does for you, one of the things they do is they connect you to their network, right? Like Fred Wilson was quoted as recently saying that he believes his Rolodex is his most powerful asset in the venture business. And Andreessen said in a Fortune interview, he said that every time we expanded our network, our entrepreneurs said we want more network, more network, more network. Well, a network is an information good. It doesn't cost much to give it away. So I think we're going to basically make the network part very, very widely available for everyone. It's very low cost for us. And we can charge kind of a cost plus and still have it be way, way, way cheaper than the other rate that you might pay.
So I want to get back to deal flow because I think this was something that, I've covered venture for a long time and it's the big proprietary thing that, whoever's the top dog in Silicon Valley has. This is what VCs really worry about with the super angels. And this is why they've had, these sort of stealthy scout programs and, tried to invest in the super angels and partner with them and have these accelerator programs. They're all worried about not getting in that center of that deal flow. How do you think you have disrupted deal flow?
So proprietary deal flow is dead. And to the extent that proprietary deal flow still exists, it's because the entrepreneur is not being smart about it. The entrepreneur is basically self-limiting the market for their shares. And that's just silly. The good news is there are dozens of great venture firms, not 5 or 10. There's dozens, maybe 100, maybe over 100. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of great angels who have started their own companies, exited them, are operators and are very entrepreneur friendly. And you're just not going to reach them knocking on doors one by one, right? So to that extent, the incubator demo days, the conferences, you get up at a launch conference or a TechCrunch Disrupt, and then various networking events, and of course AngelList commoditize that. They open that up and they allow you to create more of a market for your shares. So generally what I find is the people who are really proprietary with their companies and only want to show it to a select few investors. And I hate to insult my own generation, but it's the older entrepreneurs. They're still doing things the old-fashioned way. Whereas the younger ones, between checking and tweeting in, they know that it's an open, transparent world. So they're more open-minded about who they talk to. And so I think proprietary deal flow is basically dead. The percentage of deal flow that was proprietary and closed in 2007, it was probably 90%. Today it's probably less than 50 and it's declining fast. And it's now going across into other verticals too, like enterprise and biotech. And part of what's driving it is that people need less money, so they can raise it from many more kinds of investors. Part of it is all the platforms like us and Y Combinator. Part of it is that because you need less money, you can actually launch your product and then go raise money. And so you don't have as much to hide. The secrecy element has gone away to a large degree. So I think proprietary deal flow is dead. Now what VCs do have is proprietary access, which is their ability to get into a deal. And the really hot deals, especially the consumer ones, are sort of obvious to everyone because they're getting crazy numbers. So everybody wants to get in. So how do you get in? And that's about your brand and your access and your know-how and your knowledge. But even there, I don't think it's all necessarily good news for the investors. It's good news for the top tier because their brands are so powerful, like an Andreessen or a Sequoia can outmuscle almost anyone getting into a deal. But that being said, there are a lot of emergent brands. The super angels are all emergent brands. Google Ventures, comes out of nowhere, and Yuri Milner. So there are a lot of new brands. And most of the new brands that have come out in the last few years have been built on the notion of being entrepreneur friendly.
Yeah.
Y Combinator is built on that notion. We're built on that notion. True Ventures and Andreessen, they're all built on the notion of we're going to do what's right for the entrepreneur, even if it's economically bad for us. I was in a deal as an investor with SV Angel, and this was a while back. And I remember the company was shutting down, and it had like $75,000 left in the bank, and it was not a large amount of money. And SV Angel basically just said, okay, we're just going to let the entrepreneur keep the remainder and use it to, find his next job and tide him over. I was like, wow, like that was mind blowing. And so we all went along, we followed that lead, but it was a very nice thing of them to do. And I think they've also built their brand on being very entrepreneur friendly. So I don't know where I was going with this. I'm rambling at this point. You should probably take over.
I think it was about access.
Access,
is that
right.
part
So it's
of what,
about access. It is not about deal flow anymore. And so a lot of the firms that are doing consumer investing are falling all over themselves trying to figure out how do I differentiate myself? How do I get access into good companies? And that is the current name of the game. It's not about deal flow anymore. Anyone who does not have great deal flow should get on AngelList because we have great deal flow on AngelList. It's all there, right?
So what about the role that the brand that each venture capitalist is building for themselves is playing? I mean, when I first moved here, venture capital was sort of coming out of the shadows for the first time. And then after the crash, there was a real reaction to it. And everyone, your best friends at Benchmark, I think, were the most extreme because they had a book written about them. And they were like, we are not ever going to talk to a reporter for 5 years. And, Sequoia was very famous for this. They would, for many years, just say, it's not about us, it's about the companies. And whether or not they really believe that in the way they acted with a company can be debated, but they certainly did not go out there in the press and brand themselves and didn't want to be out there. I talk to VCs all the time now who feel like in these sort of hybrid Dave McClure, Mark Andreessen era, if you don't have a big brand for yourself, you're kind of hosed. But at what point does that become you're taking credit for what the entrepreneur's done and kind of come back to bite you?
Yeah, brand is a really weird thing. Personally, I just think it's funny how they've managed to brand money. And it's the ultimate commodity, right? It's like branding oil. Like, do you really care about Shell versus Chevron? But it turns out you do. And the reason you do is because the VC brand often reflects how nice they're going to be to you once they have control. So it goes back to this entrepreneur-friendly thing, because if you raise a large amount of money, eventually you will lose board control. You will have VCs kind of controlling the, your relationship in the company and your tenure and supporting you or not supporting you. If you ever hit a hiccup, you're going to have to get a bridge round from them because no one from the outside wants to fund you while you're on the decline. And those terms matter. So to me, brand is much less about value add and is much more about entrepreneur friendliness. So I encourage entrepreneurs, go for whoever trusts you, likes you, and will support you over who you think is going to add value. Because the add value thing you can now get from many places. You could argue that the incubators have taken over a lot of the early network and value add and advice giving. Good advisors are cheap. If let's say that there's an investor who says they're going to be value added, but you're going to pay $2 million in your valuation, well, I guarantee you can find great equivalent advisors for a lot less than $2 million. You can give them stock. So it really boils down to how are they going to treat you when there's control issues. So the good news is it's pushing the industry in an entrepreneur-friendly direction.
Yeah,
that's where the best brands are built.
There's really been an aggressive move against the value add VCs bring. I mean, we had Mark Pincus, a couple months ago, and he said that, Yuri Milner is an ideal investor because he doesn't want a board seat. He gives you lots of money. He doesn't bother you. I mean, over and over again, when you talk to entrepreneurs, you hear that. And I feel like that's been the fashionable thing that people have gone after. Daniel Ek actually sort of said the same thing in his fundraising advice last week. But for an entrepreneur kind of coming to Silicon Valley for the first time, is that really good to optimize for an investor who, either is a seed investor like, Dave McClure or Ron Conway, who's so spread so thin, or, someone whose brand is about, I'm not going to take a board seat or bother you. Isn't there some role for VCs and investors being
Absolutely.
involved?
I mean, nobody else is going to care to the level that a VC who has a lot in the company will care, but that can backfire on you too. So I think it ends up being a mix, and the market is finding its bearings on this, but you get your early advice from the incubator and your early network from there. And then after that, you get your first big bet from a McClure or a Conway, because they are very prolific with writing those early stage checks. So at least you get an early believer. And then you probably have one or two angels in your round who have invested more, really care more about the company, and maybe you put them on your board or you make them Sherpas or advisors. And then by the time the VC comes along, you have this other constituency that can advise you, support you to making sure you have a balanced relationship with a VC and not an unbalanced one. Like how many VCs are going to screw over a YC company, right? So they have a little cartel over there. Basically, the entrepreneurs have unionized almost through the incubators. So I think it's a good balance. It's a healthy balance. But definitely, it used to be that there was just, you had to get everything in one. You got your advice, your control, your money, and your brand from one investor. And so you had this bundle. And there were only 20 of them. And maybe you only had 2 term sheets. You didn't have a lot of choices. Now you can mix and match a lot more. And it's a good thing. Choice is good.
Do you have to be savvier as an entrepreneur to negotiate that, though?
You have to be very savvy. It's actually a little unfortunate, but the lead in a company, whoever that founder is, who's spending all their time dealing with the investors, I feel like half of one founder of the team will spend roughly half their time over the life of the company just dealing with investors or investor issues. And the investors don't want to acknowledge this, but I've been on the entrepreneur side enough to know that either you're pitching an investor, or you're keeping them happy, or you're looking for the next one, or you're negotiating with them, or you're working on their pet project, or whatever it is, right? But there's just a lot that goes on. So it can be a real time suck.
I still hear investors say that not every company should be listing on AngelList. That there's some sense of you should raise your money first and then list on there to get a lot of the job benefits or recruiting benefits.
Yeah, I don't think it's in investors' interest to send you to the market, right? That's just obvious. So you have to kind of consider where the advice is coming from. It's true, because AngelList is an online medium, it has different characteristics than fundraising offline. Fundraising offline is a lot more about the personal relationship. So you can actually convince someone just through your charm. Whereas AngelList is, because online, it's much more objective. So they're going to go based on your metrics, the quality of your product, and frankly, who else is in your round, gives you some social proof, some credibility. Or what famous advisor do you have, or what incredible award have you won, or what have you done? So if you can't show it, if you have to tell it, then yes, AngelList will not work as well for you. But if you can show it, AngelList will actually work better for you, because you get to show it to thousands of investors at once instead of just the 5 that you happen to meet.
Right.
So you can end up with a very competitive round where you can really set the terms the way you want.
But if what's helping you get that competitive round is having a superstar advisor or having a good angel, I mean, like in the case of Rally, they had Mike Maples and they had, Reid Hoffman. I mean, are you really opening up the market that much? Because those guys could get the money.
Absolutely. I mean, there are lots and lots of companies that come into AngelList and get funded that have no investors to start out. Loku did their seed and their A, and they had no investors coming in. Taulia did their entire A. So you can absolutely do that. You just have to have something else compelling and credible to show. So I would say today it's probably about half and half. Half the companies that we feature have good committed investors, and half of them don't. They're actually just starting out. And what we're starting to do now is for a lot of companies that come in that are too early to even have something to show, but they just have a good team, we're passing them to incubators. So we did that with 500 startups last month, where in a 2-week period, we sent them 600 companies. All the data was structured, ranked, rated, sorted, social graph, everything. You can see where the Stanford founders are and who was connected to a mentor. We gave them a processing queue just like we used to go through them. And they took in a whole bunch of companies, and they liked it enough they're going to use AngelList as their standard acceptance mechanism into their accelerator from now on. And actually, I mean, it's not a real announcement, like it's not a press announcement, but we're going to do the same thing starting tomorrow. for both AngelPad and Techstars Boston, I believe. And I think by Q1 next year, you're going to see dozens and dozens of incubators that will basically take your application directly from AngelList. So you build your references and your profile in one place. And then if you want to go for angel money, you can do that. But if you're early and you want to go for an incubator, you can go click, 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 and off you go. Right?
Interesting.
There's also, by the way, a bunch of VC funds who use AngelList to find their initial 100K seed investment. So I can't announce them yet, but there are two that we're already working with internally where they kind of review basically every deal that goes through that is above a minimum quality threshold, basically not spam. And they say, hey, do I want to be the first one in to write a 100K check into that company? So the companies are getting looked at by people who are using it to find seed deals.
So how do those partnerships work for you? Because I know when we talked about the seed documents, it was in your best interest to have. There was a law firm you launched with, I believe it was Wilson Sonsini,
yeah.
and it was in your best interest to get sort of as many as possible, so it didn't look like there was preferential treatment.
Right.
I imagine with incubators and investors, that's going to be. That gives people another reason to hate you who are looking for reasons to hate you.
No. I mean, it's going to be open. Like, everyone can use it. Every incubator can use it. Every investor can use it. All these processing queues are going to be open. So there's no preferential advantage.
But does that kill some of the advantage? I mean, if, again, like...
Their advantage has to be done on their brand and what they have to offer. That's
not. So if you're an incubator or an investor who's opting into this, they're basically... accepting your premise that there's no longer a world with proprietary deal flow.
That's right.
500 Startups is not getting a better class of applications than Techstars Boston or whatever.
If you're 500 Startups, you want as much deal flow as you can get. 500 Startups actually has a huge worldwide network. They have people on the ground in Mexico and Brazil and New York, all kinds of places, London and India. So they are going to get some proprietary deal flow, but they also realize that there are a ton of great companies on AngelList who are coming in, not necessarily for 500 Startups, they're coming in to raise angel money, and 500 Startups would love to also have a look at them and try and convince them why 500 Startups is great.
So there are many investors who believe there is a stigma to listing on AngelList, and that they say that they see deals that did the circuit that couldn't raise money, and magically they raise money on AngelList, and they argue there's some adverse selection. Do you think that is still a legitimate issue you guys deal with?
I don't think so.
No?
I think we've been around long enough now that you can see the success cases. I mean, Uber was on AngelList, Pinterest was on AngelList, BranchOut was on AngelList, Rally, Kaggle, Recurly, FlashSoft got sold. I mean, you can go to our done deals page. There are 2,000 companies that have been on AngelList that have gone on to raise big rounds. Okay, and the alumni have now raised over 1.3 billion, and that's a trailing number. We don't get the last 6 months because they don't announce their financings. So the real number is probably closer to 2 billion. There are acquisitions that have been done because of AngelList, right? So you can sit there and pretend that it's not happening, but it's happening. You can bury your head in the sand if you want. There are VCs who tell me, especially ones who are out of market, like they're not in Silicon Valley, who basically say, we would not be in business if it were not for you. We've had recently a good company. We had a Brussels-based VC who has already done 3 deals on AngelList, including a Series A, 2 for companies in Austin, 1 for a company here. Normally, those companies would never be able to reach that VC would never be able to reach that investor. There's a company we'll announce shortly that did their seed on AngelList, then their A, they had a term sheet here from a well-known VC, and we got a term sheet from a VC in London. They flew back and forth. They talked to the London guys, decided they liked him better valuation, better partners, went with that. So those channels that just open up, you can't do offline. Right.
I do want to go to questions in a minute so that Dave or whoever else is out there, before I yell at them, they can ask you whatever. But I want to talk about your experience with the Jobs Act first. All right, Ben Horowitz, when he was here, was talking about how impressed he was that you went to Washington and changed the law. Yeah, is that how you would characterize what happened?
We definitely were very involved in it. The securities laws were written in 1934, which is a long time ago. They probably reference a telegraph in there somewhere. And so a lot of the stuff that goes on at incubator demo days and at these conferences is technically illegal. When someone stands up at demo day, some mentor, and says, "You should invest in this company," that's not completely kosher, or says, here's a standardized term sheet that we're using, this is the standard AngelPad or Techstars note. that is not legal. That you're supposed to be a broker-dealer if you're doing those kinds of things. All of this was operating very much in the gray area of the securities laws. And we bend over backwards to be securities laws compliant. We have a full legal opinion up and all that stuff. And we never touch money. It's part of the reason. But it's still pretty scary. And there are a bunch of products we wanted to offer, like docs, that we could not legally do. It was just illegal for us to offer a docs product without being a broker-dealer. Broker-dealer means you have all these regulations and requirements that actually make it impossible to work with startups. So we wanted to get the law changed. People told us it was impossible, which it actually is basically impossible. We hired a bunch of gumshoe lobbyists who are awesome, and we paid them purely on like a contingency victory fee. And then we just pulled out all the stops. It turns
How did you find these guys?
Friend of friends through friends at Twitter, actually. And then what really made the difference was we were doing something that we thought was pretty good, which was we were spreading investment and investing around the country. And that's really what Congress wants to hear right now, which is, okay, you are helping companies in my jurisdiction get funded. And so when we went to Congress and we said this needs to exist, all the lobbyists can do is open a door for you. You still got to make the pitch. And we basically showed them how in every state, in almost every major city, we had a bunch of investors and we had a bunch of startups who were willing to stand up for what we were doing. So there was just all this good karma that was paid back. And I spent 6 months of my life just calling in favors left and right. And it turns out there were a lot of them to call in. It's like there was this old show on TV, Stingray, where this guy drives around and like solves people's problems and fights crime. But what he does is, at the end, when they say, "What do I owe you?" he always says, "You owe me a favor. That's it. I'll call it in someday." And then he gets all this done by spending favors. So it always turns out he has contacts here and there we can call in favors. The math doesn't work because he calls in 5 favors every episode and gets 1 back. Right? So it's like fail.
The guy's out of business now.
Yeah, but we had a different ratio. So we called in a lot of favors. We had a lot of friends. We got.
What were some of these favors? What are examples?
Basically, call up your congressman, tell them that you are an impressive entrepreneur or investor, tell them you raised money or you invested because of AngelList, tell them that this is a good thing, tell them that you want us to be able to offer docs, tell them that you want us to be able to do these new features, and tell them that they want to support this kind of activity. Like the general solicitation law, which is still in effect, but it's about to go away shortly, means that if I were to stand up right here and say, by the way, we're fundraising, I've broken the law and I've invalidated my financing for the next 6 months. Every time you write an article that says that this company is raising money, boom, you've destroyed their financing. And normally you guys don't care about it because we operate in such a closed little environment here, but AngelList is online and it's global, so it's very visible. You become a target. You can get sued, you get attacked by regulators, by state. So these were the kinds of things that we had to basically make sure were taken care of, and the Jobs Act did it. It was the only bipartisan act passed by this Congress in the last 4 years. We got to go to the Rose Garden, and Obama signed it, and I have a copy and it's sitting next to me, signed by him, which is great. And there's a story there. I'll write a book someday. It was really fun and really crazy.
Well, thanks a lot for coming here and saying there's a great story and not telling it on stage.
I mean, it's just all crazy detail.
Wait, these people need to pay $40 to get the good story?
It's funny. It's one of those things like where you pull 100 favors, right? And like I had Mitch Kapoor call up Anna Eshu, who's a Silicon Valley rep, and had Steve Case, work with us to get a piece in his recommendation to the council and so on. And you call in literally 100 favors, and each one of them takes a toll on you. At the end of the day, a random 5 magically come together and make it happen. And then at the end, for a while, it looked like it was going to get shot down in the Senate. I mean, by the way, we had to put together this crazy thing where you had to satisfy the investment banks and the regulators and all these different constituencies. And it ended up being a giant dog's breakfast of different bills combined together. And then some genius, I don't know who, but I can almost imagine is sitting around, probably some congressional staffer. He's like, how are we gonna get this thing to pass, right? It doesn't make any sense. Oh, let's call it, say it has something to do with jobs. What does it have to do with jobs? Jumpstarting our business startups. Yes, jobs. And then what congressperson can vote against something called the Jobs Act, right? So it was a miracle, right? It was literally a miracle. We had.
So that wasn't even you. You don't even know who did that.
I don't know who did that, but there was a lot of stuff going on. I mean, there's a guy who works with me, our COO, Kevin Laws, coincidentally, who's like the most likable, pleasant person. Grew up in Pennsylvania. He went with me to Congress, and I get angry. So I'm like Travis, from Uber, where if somebody says, well, all this should be regulated, I'm like, We're from Silicon Valley, right? We don't believe in regulation. But Kevin would talk him through, and he'd be friends with everyone, and he'd get everyone to like him, and he'd get everyone to agree, and he'd nod along. And we'd get phone calls from staffers, and they'd tell us the politics. They'd be like, well, he's going to vote against this because he voted against him on this bill, and they're actually horse trading on this, and so. And if you can get Goldman Sachs to sign off on this, then we can trigger this whole back, and this piece will go through. How do you do this, right? So it was like every day there's like a new puzzle to solve. So there were tons of these little things, and then you put them all together. It just somehow, I still can't believe it just sort of magically came together. But it was one of those things that I went into thinking, there is a 10% chance this will work, and it will cost us X dollars worth of effort, and so multiply it through expected value, still worth it, but we'll probably fail. But we didn't, so we got lucky.
So was there anything that it was a takeaway from that experience that other groups in the Valley who want to see stuff passed should take? I mean, you were going in with something called the Jobs Act. Other people are going in trying to get reform around immigration, which is a very hard thing.
Immigration is a wrong brand. So the moment you say immigration, you're mixing skilled and unskilled, and you're in trouble. So they need to branding is important, right? The other thing is we insisted the entire time that we were going to approach the problem like a startup. And we were told you cannot approach it like a startup. So, for example, anyone that we had to pay, we paid them success fees, right? We were like, you don't get paid if we don't succeed. But they said that's just not the way it's done, right? But that's the way we did it. Another thing was we were asked the last second. It looked like it wasn't going to pass the Senate, and they said you really have to show your support. You have to show that there are people out there who support this. And so they said get a petition, get a letter signed by a bunch of people. So we said, okay, we're going to do it our way. We're going to do a little Twitter petition, and we're going to have log in with AngelList or OAuth with Twitter, and we're going to have everyone's photos and their bios and all that stuff. And they said, none of that stuff matters. They just want a Word document, right? Just get a bunch of signatures. Stop acting Silicon Valley. But we ignored them, and so in one frenzied 36-hour period, we pulled an all-nighter, and we basically put out this viral Twitter petition that got signed by 5,000 investors and entrepreneurs. So not 5,000 randoms, but these are investors and entrepreneurs, and we were able to slice and dice it by location and how influential they were and what they'd invested in and what they looked like and who their senator was and all that stuff. And then we sent this to Congress, and one of the unions who was afraid that the Jobs Act would be used to take advantage of older people or union workers somehow opposed it. So they ran their own petition. These unions have mailing lists of millions of members. So they got 3,600 signatures against. So we got 5,004. But ours was beautiful and visual and showed these people are powerful. And we were like, yeah, I see that guy. He's one of your big campaign donors. We can do those kinds of links. And we just crushed it. And I think Congress thought, oh my God, this is sopa pipa all over again. And a lot of people who were in opposition dropped it, and it got passed. So we managed to use technology as a weapon in this cause. And I don't think we should be afraid of acting like startups. And so that was part of the lesson.
That's awesome. All right, so why don't we go to some questions from the audience? There's a microphone there and a microphone there. Guys, line up. And while people are amassing, there's been a lot of criticism about how long it's going to take the Jobs Act to actually get enacted. I mean, where are we? I mean, it's a whole sort of mess of things going on. Yeah,
there's a big bunch of it that's already in effect. Like the 500 shareholder rule is already in effect. The general solicitation rule will probably get lifted in January. There are pieces around broker-dealer laws that are already in effect. The crowdfunding piece is the one that's taking the longest, but rightly so. It's ridiculously complicated, which is how do you prevent small investors who haven't met the company, don't have a track record of investing, how do you prevent them from getting ripped off? And the SEC has to design a system where it's restrictive enough that it's not easily frauded, and it's not so restrictive the good companies just stay off. And I don't envy them that problem. I think it's really hard to solve, and I think it will probably take them the better part of next year figuring it out.
What do you think about companies like Funders Club, who are, and there's a ton of these guys who are trying to do stuff around crowdfunding already, who are kind of getting out in front of that?
Yeah, so we actually have an experiment going with crowdfunding right now. You can invest online small dollar amounts on AngelList. But it's through Second Market, and we have a little partnership with them, and they're a registered broker-dealer. So we think it's worth trying to do, and our early experiments have actually been quite successful. But you really have to be careful about being compliant with the securities laws. If you jump the gun, the problem is you're taking money from small investors who are likely going to lose their money because most startups lose money. And this is their first time losing money, so they're going to get bent out of shape. And they're going to sue somebody, and they're going to sue you. And so if you don't have an ironclad defense, and if you weren't fully 100% securities law compliant, the penalties actually can go to you personally, long after your startup is gone. So if you're using these kinds of systems, you really have to make sure you're 100% securities law compliant. So that means that you do have to get your lawyer involved. That means you do have to do legal diligence. And I would say right now, our read on it is that the best way to do that is through a broker-dealer.
So you are not of the belief that this is a Napster Uber-like situation where you change the laws by breaking them?
Oof. I mean, yeah, Napster is a good example of why you may not want to think that. Uber is a very different case because Uber is, and disclaimer, I'm a small investor in Uber from when they use AngelList.
Disclaimer, they hate us.
But I like Lyft also and Sidecar and all the others in the space and Airbnb. These guys are breaking, or not breaking, they're routing around local laws and local issues. And those laws are more easily fungible, and in some ways they're actually more antiquated because local governance is smaller, it's more easily hijacked by corporate interests. So the number of medallions and taxi medallions in San Francisco is a crying shame. Essentially, we need these more taxis. And so people know that. They know it's hard to get a cab. So while the people aren't looking, you can have some shady business. You can have shady business with the city council, but once people are paying attention and galvanized on it, the law is going to change because people want their cabs, they want their Ubers, they want their Lyfts. So given that, I think they actually have a different issue than the Napsters of the world, right? Who were basically just, that music, was available in other ways, but now it's just like free, right? So that's a very different thing. So I think long term, the Ubers and the Lyfts and the Airbnbs of the world will win all their fights. It's just going to be a cost of doing business for them. It will be an expense.
But you shouldn't have the same philosophy when it comes to crowdfunding.
No, the securities laws are radioactive. They're very different. The securities laws are not going to, if you get, for example, if you raise money from an unaccredited investor, or if you raise money and handle money through an unlicensed broker-dealer, your entire transaction is void. Not just the bit you did through them, but all the money you raised from all the other investors too. And they have a right of rescission, which means they can put the stock back on you personally once they decide it's lost money. So those securities laws are not changing anytime soon. Even the crowdfunding, when it comes through, you can't get out ahead in front of it because nobody knows what it's going to look like. You don't know what the final rules are going to be. So by definition, you're already breaking some of them. So I don't think you can expect to get grandfathered in. And then even if you do, you can always get sued by your own investors when they lose money. So that civil right they have to sue you doesn't go away. So don't mess with the securities laws. Yes, we got the law changed first, then we're doing stuff. I wouldn't do it in the other order.
All right, great. Go ahead.
Actually, you might have already answered my question. I read an article in Tech Blog a few months ago about something else, and they were talking about AngelList and people investing in using $5,000 to $10,000 and actually investing in it. Sounds like that's what you were talking about as soon as I got up here.
Yeah, that's what we're doing with Second Market. So there are a couple of companies on AngelList today where you can go, you can review the profile, and if you like what you see, you can invest a small amount online. And then we'll send you off to Second Market. They'll actually test you for suitability, accreditation, Patriot Act requirements, and then happily take your money and pass it on to the company. So we're trying that right now, but to be securities law compliant, it only works for accredited investors. It only works for investors who understand the risks as judged by the broker-dealer. And it has to be done through Second Market or an equivalent broker-dealer.
But is this where your business is going eventually, once this is all legal, once it's out in the open?
It's a test. We'll see. I honestly don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. It's like any startup, you try a lot of things.
$20 tickets. We'll see how it goes next year.
So I love this last part on where you're butting heads with regulations, and I'd like to follow up on that for a second, because it seems like most of the innovation and most of the things that you've been able to enable have been in spaces where there has not been another large hurdle that people have had to go up against, like the FDA.
Right.
Do you think AngelList can be as much of a force for good in the biotech space or in a context where people have to go up against other imminent regulations?
Yeah, it's really frustrating what's going on in the, for example, with the FDA, where a lot of biotech innovation and testing is moving overseas because the approval cycles here are insane. I don't know if we can solve that, but one thing we can do is at least by assembling the community of startups, hopefully giving them a voice. There's no question that Congress is paying a lot more attention to Silicon Valley now. It's mainly because of SOPA and PIPA, secondarily because of the Jobs Act. It's coming up again with a startup visa. There's a lot of money here, there's a lot of influence here. Everyone's using the iPhone, everyone's using Android. So Congress gets that. And I think, you saw Barack Obama do the IMA on Reddit. So I think we're going to have a lot more influence in the future. It's not going to come soon enough. Things like the FDA will take forever because those are highly controlled regulatory bodies with deep entrenched interests, maybe in the decade time frame. But there are also regulatory bodies that have been very favorable to innovation. I would argue that a lot of the innovation that is even possible today in Silicon Valley wouldn't have happened if the FCC hadn't taken a forward-looking stance. You do see the FCC actually passing rules to unbundle more spectrum, to release it from broadcasters, to force, like the Verizon iPhone 5, if you buy it, it's unlocked. And it's unlocked because the FCC said if you want LTE spectrum, then any phone you sell Verizon on that LTE spectrum has to be unlocked. So I hope that's a good model that more of the regulatory bodies can follow, but I'm not holding my breath. It would be good for us to be more helpful in that regard, and we'll try. I think when the Startup Visa Act comes up, I've been very explicit with Steve Case and others that when that comes up for a vote, and if it is narrowly enough targeted at the Silicon Valley interest, i.e. we don't have to make a decision on 10 other things that are bundled with it, we will do our best to get our community organized behind it.
What do you think the odds of that getting passed are?
I think they're actually, if it's targeted enough, I actually think it's quite high, especially because of the drubbing that the Republicans took from the Hispanic vote in this most recent election. There's now suddenly a lot of bipartisan vote on immigration. Excuse me. That said, the worst thing that could happen to the startup visa is it gets bundled into the larger immigration debate. What's more likely, though, is that it could be viewed as a quick win, something they can pass that they can all agree on that gets the wheels greased for the bigger immigration act.
Okay, great.
Hi, my question is about lawyers. Like, what do you see the future of lawyers? Is AngelList going to take them totally out of the equation, that you can just sign a standard document with investors and just get your money?
Most lawyers, so by the way, Wilson Sonsini and Cooley and Mofo and a bunch of others will actually do the closing online for free using AngelList docs. There's now about a half dozen of them, although we haven't fully announced it. Ben probably knows the full list. But they never viewed the docs as a profit center. It was a loss leader for them to acquire the customer. And the cost didn't come in actually doing the docs. It came in all the back and forth negotiation because everybody wants their pet sentence or pet clause or pet phrase in there. And so by moving it all online and standardizing it, what we've basically said, it's free. You want to change anything, it's suddenly $20,000. So now it puts the onus on the first person who was about to submit their pet clause to say no, because it'll reveal to all the other investors that, oh yeah, that guy, his little special clause is costing you 20 grand. And so it uses social pressures to standardize rather than actually, it's not, the time saving comes in not having the negotiation, not in creating the paperwork. So I think the lawyers will continue to work with the company afterwards. You still need a lawyer for all kinds of things, and that's just, some of it is good hygiene and some of it is just the regulated environment we live in. I actually have a side point of view that I don't think any startup can be in business if they follow every law. I mean, if you just went and actually read all the regulations you're pinning up on the wall according to San Francisco laws, you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm breaking that one, and that should shut down right here. So you can't pay too much attention to them. And luckily, a lot of them are not enforced against smaller companies. But you still definitely do need a lawyer. It's a necessary part of doing business. And by the way, the best lawyers are actually advisors. You can think of them as cheap advisors. There are a few lawyers in the Valley who have actually built a reputation being founder-friendly. And I really encourage you to seek those lawyers out because they can be a good counterweight sometimes against if you have an investor dispute. Who are some of them?
I mean, there's entrepreneurs in the room. Name names. This is helpful to people.
I think Buddy Arnhem at Perkins Coie has kind of got that reputation. I'm blanking. Pillsbury, there's Jorge Del Calvo has that reputation. I use Eric Benesek. He's a boutique lawyer at VBL. He's really good. Silicon Legal, Andre Gakarian spun out and formed his own little firm. They're now actually startup lawyers. So those are good ones to seek out. But there are quite a few of them. We will add a category at some point to AngelList that will show you good lawyers and what companies they're associated with. Ted Wang is now a lawyer to the stars because he's a lawyer to Facebook, but he's
our lawyer too. I just want to point out.
Right, to the stars thing. Yeah. But he did the whole ecosystem a great service by releasing Series Seed. Yoakum at
It's Paul Carr's lawyer.
Is he? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, Paul needs a lawyer.
Yoakum loves Paul. A lot of business there.
Keeps him busy. Yeah,
it's the next best thing to being Michael Arrington's lawyer.
Ooh, yeah. Mike probably has two.
He does.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good ones out there.
Okay, awesome.
I would say, if anything, the lawyers have had to do more work branding themselves and provide more value to the ecosystem than the investors do. Because the investors can always write you a check. There's my value add. Lawyer, you got to pay them. So they really have to convince you that they know their stuff.
All right. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, Naval, Ajay here. My question is, what is a successful AngelList profile? I'm struggling with, at what point do I list myself, the startup on AngelList, in idea phase, or when I have all my advisors and everything lined up? I mean, you have a lot of stuff there that you have to sort of check.
Sure. I mean,
I'm just wondering if you can talk to that.
You can list yourself anytime, but with 100,000 companies on there, you're not going to get noticed until you get promoted or something unique or special comes along. So you can build your profile with impunity. If there's anything even mildly interesting about it, we'll follow it and keep track of it. You're probably not going to get funded until you either have traction, or you have a pretty unique product, or unless you just have a stellar team assembled, or you have some social proof. Those are the four things that investors look at. Like I said, starting tomorrow, you'll be able to use it to apply to AngelPad and to Techstars, and of course 500 startups in the next cycle, and we're going to announce probably dozens more. So you'll also be able to use it earlier stage for that basis. So I don't think there's any downside to creating it early. Just keep working on it. Just the thing that's the part where you might do yourself a disservice is if you just leave things blank that are obvious, like the team stuff. Take the time to fill out the team bios, because investors really do. At the end of the day, they fund teams. Everything else is a kind of proxying, or if you have traction, definitely list it. I like to think there's no such thing as too early. I know a lot of different memes get spread. The reality is you're not going to get noticed until something spectacular shows up in your profile, or unless we promote it. There's just too much out there.
What do you mean when you say traction and social proof? I feel like those are terms that get thrown around, and a lot of startups don't really know what that is, if they have it, or what they're aiming for.
Yeah, social proof is when somebody who's worth listening to believes in you, and they show that in some way. If it's an advisor, they commit their time. If it's an investor, they commit their money. Or it could just be like you recruited some incredible team member. Excuse me, like you recruited a core contributor of Ruby on Rails to be on your developer team. That is a form of social proof because that person's committing their time. Traction is basically quantitative evidence of customer demand. So if you're in enterprise software, it might be 2 or 3 early customers who are paying a bit. If it's in a consumer, it might be the bar might be as high as hundreds of thousands of users. If it's in mobile apps, it might be your download rate. But sorry if I've used this joke before because now I use it all the time, but it's like it's the Supreme Court definition of porn. You'll know it when you see it. So you'll know what traction is, and investors know what traction is. It is a moving target. The entire ecosystem is getting far more efficient. Companies are accomplishing a lot more with a lot less. 2 years ago, you could have gotten your daily deal startup funded pre-traction. 18 months ago, you could not have gotten a daily deal startup funded, no matter how much traction you had. 12 months ago, you could have gotten your mobile app company funded with 10,000 downloads. Today, it's probably going to take a few 100,000 downloads and a strong, rapid adoption rate for real financing to take place. So the definition of traction keeps changing as the environment gets competitive. So that's why it's actually useful to look at AngelList and see what companies just got funded, because that will give you an idea of what the bar is. And you can see that through our trending list, through our featured lists, and through our done deals. Featured you can't see unless you're an investor. It's, again, the general solicitation law, so there's a lot of privacy settings and controls. But you can see funding announcements as they come out. and you can get a sense of how much traction these companies had.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so as AngelList has started to grow, I'm sure there's been people that wanted to try to take a piece of that pie, whether it be patent trolls or somebody who's litigious coming out there. So I'm just curious, what have you experienced like that? What could you share that could help us kind of not have to go through some of those headaches?
Us personally?
Yeah, you personally.
Yeah.
And that could be even, people like recruiters trying to bypass your system.
Yeah,
things.
so plenty of people bypass the system. Investors, recruiters, lawyers, companies, have at it. More power to you. Don't care. That's that's what it means to be a platform, right? That's people do that on Craigslist, people do that on LinkedIn. Go nuts. As long as you got some value out of it. The patent trolls, luckily, we have not been hit with yet. I don't think anything we're doing is patentable, let alone patented. But the reality is that the patent examiners have let a lot of stuff slip through. We don't make any money yet, so you're coming after an empty pile, an empty box. So I don't know what you're going after, but maybe someday they'll come after us. I guess it's a mark of success, but we haven't been sued yet. I do think the patent system is in horrible need of reform.
So that's a big problem entrepreneurs have. Are you going to solve that one?
There's so many entrenched interests on the other side. The intellectual ventures of the world now are also making money off of it. It's a really and it's getting really scary with Google buying Motorola Mobility, $12.5 billion for patents. Apple and Samsung suing each other in patent oblivion. The good news is the incentives to solve it are now with Apple and Google and Samsung and those big companies because they're embroiled in so many patent lawsuits, they can't necessarily view it as a victory. They have a lot more influence than us, and I think and hope they'll get the law changed. But then again, knowing big companies, they'll get it changed in a way that it benefits big companies.
How does it need to be changed?
I think that there's just a phrase obvious to those skilled in the art that goes into granting a patent. Like you're not supposed to get a patent on anything that's obvious to those skilled in the art. And that just needs to be enforced.
Yeah.
And certainly software and business model patents need to either not exist or just have a much, much higher bar. Maybe in this day and age of innovation, the time frame for a granted patent needs to not be 17 years, right? Like what it was in 1800 and whatever when they built the steam engine. It was 17 years. Maybe that made sense today. If you compress down an internet time, it should be a lot shorter. And there should probably be open review and feedback process. They should probably, just a random idea, making one up. Maybe every patent should be thrown up on the internet, and there should be an expert panel of one representative from each, company and from each part of the ecosystem, and there's hundreds of them, and they vote on whether this thing is obvious or not, and that's it. And if it is, you don't get it granted.
You
should be a really high bar. Sorry?
You could build that. It could be part of AngelList.
Eventually, maybe.
All right, so a few last things, and then we'll get out of here. You're our last one of the year, as I said. We're taking a much desired break in December. In January, though, we have a very strong lineup. We're going to have Brian Chesky from Airbnb in San Francisco. We're going to have Chad Dickerson of Etsy in New York, who never does things, and I've spent 6 months twisting his arm to do this, so I'm incredibly glad. And then we're going to have someone who I think is one of the most exciting new entrepreneurs, Sophia Amorosa of Nasty Gal in LA, who will, I think, be our first woman that we've had. So an amazing lineup of 3 people whose businesses are actually all making ass loads of money, who've raised at billions of dollars in valuations. So it'll be a great month. Next year, we have a lot of great people lined up. We have Drew from Dropbox. We have Phil Libin. Mark Andreessen said he's doing it. Dick Costello is going to do it. We're going to have a phenomenal lineup, and we're really excited. As you know, a lot of these will sell out really quickly. We're about to start opening up memberships for next year, which guarantees that you get in, plus a lot of other benefits. It is also the reason that we don't completely go out of business doing these events and offering a $20 ticket. So if you have an expense account and you want to make sure you get into every event and help, support the kind of journalism and events we do, we're going to be opening that up probably in the next week. So keep an eye out for that. The other thing that keeps us from going out of business with doing events at a loss are our sponsors. And as Naval said earlier, Braintree sponsored this one. So if you enjoyed being here for free or cheap, it would be really nice if you thanked Braintree for paying for your ticket on Twitter or something like that. So this brings us to the end and the final 2 questions that we always ask everybody. So the first is, what is the one thing that you believe that very few other people believe?
Yeah, I don't know if this is all that rare of a belief in this audience, but I really firmly believe that the actual efficient size of a company is shrinking very rapidly. And so the future will be almost all startups. Like I think most of the world and most business will adopt the startup mentality in the sense that there will be small companies loosely connected and coupled to each other, almost through APIs or processes for their needs. The Industrial Revolution, way back when, before I was born, created this massive clustering effect where basically said there's economies of scale from having factories. And so everybody has to gang together in these 5,000, 10,000 person companies. And I think that trend has now reversed thanks to information technology. And you could have a future where maybe your son or daughter will wake up in the morning and there'll be a message on their phone or in their brain implant or Google Glasses or whatever the heck it is. And they will have been assigned, they'll have a couple of job offers right that morning. They'll pick the one they want to do for the next 2 or 3 days. They'll do that through a series of kind of APIs and interfaces to the rest of the world. And then they'll get rated and they'll get feedback. So in the future, we're all Uber drivers, right? Or we're all driving lifts around with pink mustaches or delivering people's food. But I think the contract work trend is going to increase. And I think the size of your average company is going to decrease. I think we're going to see more and more billion-dollar businesses built by 4 or 5 people, and it'll stay at that. And so I think that is one thing, for example, the venture capital industry does not believe. I think the venture capital industry still believes that you're going to have to put a couple of $100 million into some company at some point to continue scaling it. I don't think that's true. I think you will be able to break out and outsource pieces that today you don't think are outsourceable. Like you will be able to outsource your sales. You will be able to outsource your revenue collection. You will be able to outsource your bookkeeping, reconciliation. You may not outsource the final stage of your hiring, but you'll outsource the early stage of it. So there's going to be lots and lots and lots of small companies loosely coupled. This is really bad news for all the people who were laid off in the last recession, because they don't think that way. They are going to go and try and find jobs at big companies, and a lot of the jobs that are going to be created now are going to be at small companies, which are going to require them to be more dynamic, more adaptable, more information savvy. A corollary to that is anybody who is comfortable with information technology today has a 10x advantage in productivity or greater over someone who is not comfortable with information technology. And so what you have is a phenomenon where it's, everyone likes to say the rich are getting richer and income inequality, but I think the smart are getting richer. And society doesn't know how to deal with this. And so literally, if you're someone who is good with computers, you can produce 10 times the output with someone who's working with their hands all day, or 100 times, or 1,000 if you're Kevin Systrom. So given that, society doesn't know what to do. We're not meant to handle those kinds of differences in productivity between individuals. And it's very hard to retrain the last generation. And so in the process, I think we're going to try and punish the rich, and we're going to catch the smart in that dragnet. And that's going to be an interesting dislocation.
So you think we won't see things like Facebook anymore, where a company in 8 years goes from a handful of guys to thousands and a huge campus and sucking up as much talent as they can?
I think any entrepreneur worth their salt could today build Facebook with, if they were building Facebook today and they had the same feature set, they could do it with a few hundred people.
Wow.
It's just that if Facebook and Google are in the situation that large companies end up in, where the founders know that 80% of the people in there are not really needed, they just don't know which 80%. You can't identify. They're all lost now in the politicking.
I think you described Yahoo.
Yeah, you can't identify. Yeah, the ratio might be different there, but that's Marissa's job. She's got to get in there and clean house. You'll know she's doing her job if she fires a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
That's
we've said that since she was hired. She still hasn't done it, so.
She's trying to figure it out. She's trying to figure out which chunk.
How much of Yahoo do you think needs to be fired? No one's watching anymore.
I haven't, the truth is I haven't used Yahoo in a long time.
So all of them?
I know, I just haven't used it. I don't even know what they do that much. I mean, there are parts of it that are pretty cool, like they have some marketplace products like Yahoo Autos, and Yahoo Finance is probably still the best finance site on the web. But like, we switched off Yahoo Mail a long time ago. Yahoo Search, what happened to it? Right?
Yeah.
Did they go to Bing or something? Yeah. So Yahoo just needs to figure out what business is not in, cut all of those. So Yahoo doesn't just need to fire people, it needs to exit entire businesses and then focus on a new set. The future is all mobile, so Yahoo's got to bet on mobile, but saying you got to bet on mobile is like saying you got to bet on tech. It's too broad. So you got so hopefully she won't come out and say, we're betting on mobile. Like, okay, yes, of course you're betting on mobile. What part of mobile? Right?
So if in the future we're all working for small companies, and in some cases you're even your own contractor and your own startup, does that mean everyone has to work harder? Because people at startups work a lot harder than people at big companies, on average.
Yeah, but you're working it your way. There's less bullshit, hopefully. And when you're doing it your own way, it doesn't feel like work. To me, the definition of work is a set of things you have to do that you don't want to do. By definition, if you want to do it, it's not work. That is literally the difference between work and leisure. Right? Like when you play video games, for example, when you're raising cows on Farmville and paying money to Mark Pincus, right? And you're depositing coins into his wallet. That's work, right? Farming is work. Why are you farming? But you don't consider it work because you want to do it. So that's the genius of Zynga.
Not looking so genius anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, I would say that is a thing many people I know do not believe. So you've passed that one. Now, Mr. Ravikant, what would be your mediocre superpower?
Yeah, this is a weird one. I tried to think about this. I couldn't come up with a great one. I think, so mediocre superpower, I mean, you can interpret that a lot of ways, right? Like to someone who is obsessed with world domination, mediocre one might be, continental domination. But I guess you're not going to let me get away with it that easily.
No, that's not mediocre.
Yeah, my mediocre superpower, if this qualifies as mediocre enough, would be having the ability to say no without feeling guilty. And I kind of feel like, especially now with AngelList, we're in this position where we've sort of taken on the mantle of trying to help all the startups. And you can't help all the startups. Most of them are not ready to be funded. Most of them do not deserve to be funded. You can't meet with them all. They all want to meet with you. They all want personal time. They all want personal advice. And you have to triage. And so you have to say no all day long. And when you say no, you just feel bad because that's, you're setting out to do the opposite. And so I'd just love to be able to say no without feeling bad about it. It would make my day a lot easier. I end up in a lot of meetings that I feel guilty. I get guilted into them, but I really don't want to be in that meeting. I want to get out.
Your solution could have been a way for you to say yes to everything. Like you just want to be let off the hook.
Oh, yeah, but that wouldn't be a mediocre superpower. If you could say yes to everything, then that's a real superpower. Yeah.
I suppose.
Right.
How many meetings? Because you seem like a pretty blunt guy. I'm surprised you got guilted into
I've now
meetings.
gotten ruthless about killing useless meetings. I own the domain idon'tdocoffee.com. So I was a jerk for a while. I would say responses from Naval at idon'tdocoffee.com, but that was too much of a jerk. And I like coffee, and San Francisco has great coffee. So I still do a couple of meetings, but I really try and solve everything by email first. Say, look, if it can be solved by email, let's do that, because then you can help 30 companies in the same time period. You could have met one. Or if you can't do that, let's do a phone call. And if you can't do that, then let's do a Skype. If you can't do that, let's do a meeting, and let's bundle them together. There's 4 of them in 1 hour, and just be very efficient, cut to the chase. And actually, Harj Tagger from YC told me this, that when he shortened the amount of time that he spent in office hours, it got way more efficient. There's no time for someone to come in and kind of start doing the pleasantries. They know they have 15 minutes before the next guy walks in, so they're just more efficient. And I would say to startups, don't spend your time doing meetings unless you really, really have to. I really think networking is overrated. There's all these articles about you ought to network more, and this is how you build. It makes me want to vomit, right? Go do something great, and your network will instantly emerge. If you build a great product, or if you get a good customer base, I guarantee you we will get you funded. You will not have to go take internal meetings, building relationships years in advance. All that meeting stuff you're doing, shaking hands, do it for recruiting. Do it to learn from really, really smart people, but you got to make sure you have something to offer them too, otherwise you're just taking. But just sort of networking, if you're standing around an event with a name tag and a glass in your hand, then that kind of includes this event, now that I
Not
think about
here.
it. It's sort of, you're doing it for entertainment. You're doing it because that's your leisure time.
This is Farmville.
This is not your work time. This is your leisure time. Yeah, let's just be clear. For those of you who told your coworkers, oh, I'm going to an important, no, it's not work. This is entertainment. If the beer and pizza didn't tip you off. I'm sorry to say I'm not Louis C.K. That would have been far more entertaining, I'm sure.
I was still very entertained.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being our last guest of the year, Naval,
Thanks for
Ravikant,
having me.
everyone.